any new thing, oh, it must be perimenopause. What if it's iron deficiency, bile insufficiency? It might be a thyroid that's underperforming.
I talk about estrogen as that super charismatic party friend. She's great, but at some point you really need to push her out the door and have some quiet time.
I never expected my mental health to take as big a dive as it did. Basically depression.
It's temporary. That's not how you're always going to be now. Women in their post-reproductive years, they report feeling pretty fantastic.
Let's welcome the panel to the stage. Come on up, Dr. Libby, Ali, and Dr. Lara. All right, so this is super exciting to have our very first live podcast recording. Just really open up this conversation in a different way about perimenopause and menopause, because I think we can all agree that the way it's currently being talked about, it's almost like an illness. It's definitely terrible, apparently, and it's all downhill. And what I'm concerned about is it's really setting us up to think the worst. And what I really want to set the intention for tonight is that we leave here with a breath of fresh air, with just one gem, maybe more, just one gem that you can then take into your week and feel better about the fact that it's not a downhill spiral, it's a power shift. And so I'm really, really excited to start this conversation. I know that these ladies probably don't need much of an introduction, but as we go through, Dr. Lara, naturopathic doctor, author, just very knowledgeable when it comes to women's health, and you've written several books. Ali Daddo, thank you for being here. Love the work that Ali's doing in terms of being a spokesperson for women going through perimenopause and menopause, and we're going to hear from your own journey as well. And the founder of Aviana, which is an amazing platform helping women. And Dr. Libby as well. Dr. Libby, also amazing author, biochemist, biochemist. I'm really terrible at reading scripts also, by the way, guys. I'm like, put questions together for these guys, and I was like, don't expect me to ask any of those. And so let's open up this conversation. I actually really wanted to start with you, Dr. Libby, because I feel like so many women reach perimenopause or menopause and they feel completely blindsided with what they experience. It's like their bodies have all of a sudden turned against them. Why do you think we still know so little about the phases and what's actually happening as we biologically age?
Well, one of the gifts, I think, of the last couple of years is that this topic has hugely come to light. I think everyone in this room can agree that perimenopause was a term that even 10 years ago, only health professionals were even aware of, but now everyone's aware of it. And before I answer your question, Nat, I want to, I guess, just consider the drawbacks and the benefits of this big conversation that we're having right now. The immense benefits is that women are getting the help and the support that they desperately need and have always deserved. So there is no question about that. Women who are suffering now understand so much more, but still the tip of the iceberg, but they understand so much more, and they can come together and support each other as we start to unpack. And Lara is so superb at unpacking all the different stages of perimenopause. One of the drawbacks that I see, though, is that when we label something as perimenopause, what we're essentially saying is it's changing sex hormones that are responsible for whatever I'm experiencing. And right now there's a tendency, I think, for women between 38 and 55, if there's any new thing, oh, it must be perimenopause. And that worries me, because what if it's iron deficiency? I'm obsessed with that right now. Perimenopause is way more difficult if you go through it iron deficient. You might be insulin resistant. Lara talks a lot about that. You could have a bile insufficiency. You need bile to be able to detoxify your hormones so that they can be incorporated into your urine and your feces and actually leave your body. It might be a thyroid that's underperforming. So when we say it's perimenopause, what if behind the changing sex hormones are all these other nutritional and metabolic health changes that are now allowing you to experience what life is like without the buffering of that consistent progesterone production that I'm sure Lara will speak to so beautifully. So the other quick thing too, before I stop rabbiting on, because I can talk underwater and I need to be careful of that tonight, I'm really concerned for our younger women. So 30-year-old women are now terrified of perimenopause, and they don't need to be. And we need to there needs to be space for all conversations the women who are genuinely having a truly tough time, and then the women for whom their transition is very mild, where the suffering is very mild, or there's no suffering. We need space for, and we need to continue to learn from each other, which is, I think, a big part of what tonight is going to do, Nat. So I've probably not even answered the question, but anyway, set a scene.
You have, absolutely. Lara, I think this then opens up the conversation, because I love how we're talking about the fact that women are living longer, the fact that it's been blamed on the fact, actually, we've blamed it on women living longer, right? So the question, I guess, is menopause a result or an accident of women actually living longer?
No, categorically no. So before I became a naturopathic doctor, I was an evolutionary biologist, which that's a bit of my background. And I only realize now, decades later, how much that influenced me. I think once you see things through the lens of evolutionary biology, you cannot unsee it. That it just informs nothing. There's a famous quote that nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. And I would apply that to health as well. And so even though it's sort of it's a core part of this narrative that, oh no, nobody ever used to go through menopause. Menopause is new. Therefore, we're in this deficiency state. That is not what the science shows at all. There's several lines of evidence to suggest that not only did people, obviously some people always used to get through to 70 or 80. That was sort of, we think that was the average, that was the biological lifespan that humans could achieve probably ever since, as long as we've been human. The everyone used to die by 45 is the average life expectancy, which takes into consideration dying young from many causes, including, it's very sad, but even not even 200 years ago, 1 in 2 children used to die before the age 5. So that became an average, statistical average. But not only have we been living into our 70s and 80s, some of us, the lucky individuals, for as long as we've been human, but that a longer human lifespan probably was evolved and was selected for because women in their post-reproductive years are so beneficial to their human groups, like their family groups. And so you could frame it that actually, a longer human lifespan evolved because of menopause. And that's for both sexes. So men get to live longer too, because those long-lived genes were so beneficial in women.
Yeah, I remember doing some digging somewhere, and I was absolutely able to confirm that if you made it to the age of 30 or 35, you would go through menopause. Basically, if you survive that long, then you were going to keep living, basically. Yeah,
so we know this from modern day forager people. I mean, not to get too far into the weeds on this, but there are some people still in the world who are living a very traditional lifestyle. They know about menopause. They're happy about it. They do not experience symptoms with it. That's pretty clear in the scientific literature and observations from those modern day forager people. So there's nothing about perimenopause, the transition, that should be inherently symptomatic. It can be very symptomatic because of what's called evolutionary mismatch, or a mismatch with our modern world. And there are several factors that do contribute to symptoms in the modern world.
So if we looked at our, say, grandmothers or even their mothers, the chances of them having symptoms in perimenopause were low?
Yeah, I think it was lower. Actually, if you want to know, one of the reasons they think that menopause, and well, in fact, we should at some point circle back to me and we'll talk about the different words, perimenopause and menopause, because they get conflated, which is contributing to a lot of the confusion. But perimenopause, those years leading up to the final period, is actually a time of kind of higher than normal estrogen. And then, of course, menopause or postmenopause are the 3 or 4 decades, if we're lucky, of our life that is in a lower estrogen state, not a zero estrogen state. A colleague of mine, a professor of endocrinology, she frames it as, I really love this, she frames it as those post-reproductive lower hormone years, during those decades, we're freed from the demands of our reproductive hormones. Mm-hmm. So it's a really nice way to reframe it. We are, as humans, even unique compared to other mammals, we are adapted to that lower hormone state. Our body can recalibrate to that, which is not to say that nobody should take estrogen. It's not like that at all, actually. I mean, both things can be true. It can be true that we evolved to do this. It's normal to be in that lower hormone state. And also, some women feel better on hormone therapy. And part of the evolutionary mismatch, I'll just say it while I'm thinking of it, and I've heard this from a few different scientists, one of the reasons in our modern world that the perimenopause transition is so difficult is that we, on average, go through our reproductive years with a much higher level of estrogen. We calibrate to that higher estrogen when we're young, and as amazing and beneficial as estrogen is, it's not great to be running hot like that for decades. And in my first book, I talk about estrogen as that super charismatic party friend. Like, you want her to come around once in a while. She's great. But at some point, you really need to push her out the door and have some quiet time. And that's what estrogen's like every menstrual cycle. Actually, you would not want to be running hot at your ovulatory level of estrogen all the time. It's just exhausting. It's quite overstimulating. So that's, and the reason that we run higher estrogen is because we don't spend, depending on the individual, we don't spend as many years in lactational amenorrhea, which is the period suppressed by breastfeeding. Our ancestors would have spent a big chunk of their life like that. That's a very low estrogen state, actually.
Well, also, I think what would happen is that they would have more children from a younger age, but over a longer period of time, and potentially not ever experience the transition. They would just stop breastfeeding and then they would have no more periods.
They would, very often in that traditional scenario, they would be, having their final baby around 42, breastfeeding for a few years, never getting another period, and then cruising from that breastfeeding state of quite low estrogen, high oxytocin, into just the state of cruisy, into postmenopause, still low estrogen, lower oxytocin. Actually, the scientists are looking into how the role oxytocin might play in not only symptoms of the menopause transition, but also like long-term health risks.
Which might also, completely off topic, but might also explain why women who are in new relationships through perimenopause are actually not experiencing those symptoms because their oxytocin is higher than being in a long-term relationship.
Is that the tip that we're all taking? We all need a new partner.
Well, you know what?
Menopause.
It's true, and I'll speak to that actually, because there's this sort of narrative that menopause is associated with lower libido. Hormonally speaking, that's actually not true, and it's actually because we start getting more testosterone shining through. So women in their late 40s, 50s can actually have higher libido. And for obvious physiological reasons. And you speak to a woman at that age who's in a new relationship and she's like, low libido. So what are you talking about?
Well, I think also it's important, and we should talk about some symptoms, but I think in my understanding, what should be happening in those perimenopausal years or the years beforehand, and we probably should also speak to what that is, like you said, but really it should be something like the cycles might be a little bit more, they're still considered regular, but they fluctuate. So 28 one, 29 the next, 27 the one after, whereas it used to be like clockwork. It starts to become a little bit more fluctuating.
It shortens. In the earliest phases, actually really classic is the cycle will shorten.
Right.
So it used to be 28, now it's like 26, 24. Are people nodding? That's what you'll see. Those are the early years of perimenopause.
But also then the periods should also become shorter.
Oh, they don't. The bleeds themselves.
But there should be a period in time, if you're looking at what's actually happening. I'm not saying that's what we're seeing now, but if you're looking at what should be happening, these are the things that I would say would be normal at this phase in time. We don't see any of this. We see heavier, terrible bleeds. We see night sweats, not just before the period. We see them hot flushes. We're not even night sweats, and it's important to distinguish between the two. Like you said, low libido, like all the symptoms that we're seeing that women are talking about shouldn't really be associated with the phase.
Well, it's like I said, there's nothing that should be inherently symptomatic about a transition phase. It's second puberty. So first puberty can be symptomatic as well, but there's nothing sort of built into it that it should be. Again, the symptoms that young people experience, I would also attribute some of that to the phrase evolutionary mismatch. That's not my phrase, but it just means us, quite ancient beings, creatures trying to live in the modern world, the nutrient deficiencies, being exposed to the modern food supply, things like that can create symptoms.
Ali, you were very open with your perimenopause and menopause journey. I'd love you to talk about some of the symptoms, but I would also love for you to share which symptom actually surprised you the most.
Gosh, I mean, I was one of those women that went into perimenopause knowing absolutely nothing, like not a single thing. I thought menopause was just something where your period stopped. Maybe I was like that. I was like channeling myself for many years. Yeah, where your period stopped and that was it. Mine was a bit of a perfect storm of things though, where my adrenals were shot. I was under so much stress. I was moving countries and I had so much going on emotionally as well. And I think, for me, that the hardest part for sure, I always talk about, was I never expected my mental health to take as big a dive as it did and end up with basically depression. And I'd always been a fairly positive person, and that was where, but I think again, it's like there was so many factors that were bleeding into that. The fact I wasn't sleeping, the fact that it was very stressful, the fact I was gaining weight at a huge amount, the fact that I knew nothing of what was happening. So everything just layered on top of that to create like this storm of just so many symptoms and not knowing where to go and what to do. And again, having no resources as well that I knew of at the time.
Let's talk about some of the symptoms, and then let's also touch on the phases, or what is perimenopause, menopause. Maybe, Libby, some of the most common symptoms that we're seeing.
I'm a little bit left of centre with this, in that I'll give you an example. So if, let's say, someone comes to me, when I was still seeing patients, if someone came to me and said, all of a sudden, I have a lot of wind, it's just come out of nowhere, the first thing I'm going to look at is what's happening with their digestion, what's happening with their food, what's happening with stress in their life, because obviously stress can be a huge disruptor to great digestion. And so just because someone is going through their perimenopausal transition, let's say they then come in and say, I'm in perimenopause and I've got all this wind, my brain doesn't go, that's perimenopause. My brain still goes, something happening with the gut. I'm going to find that. So I've always been someone who wants to treat what the person is actually experiencing. I have a phrase I use in my work, the road in is the road out. So I'm not denying for a second that our sex, or they shouldn't even be called sex hormones, but our
ovarian hormones.
Thank you, Lara. That our ovarian, we understand that they play an enormous role, not just with reproduction, but biologically. Progesterone, and Lara speaks to this beautifully, but is a powerful anti-anxiety agent because of the way it binds to GABA receptors, which is one of our chill pills. So I'm not denying for a second that the changes in our sex hormones can have such a big impact on how we feel and function, but it's not where my brain goes first. I see them as almost protecting us from some of the things that are going on in the background. So then when they start to change, and Lara I'm sure will explain all the different phases of perimenopause, what's high and what's low, but I'm going to still treat the thing that's going on. So I will look at gut function. I will look at, it's a time when the thyroid can start to not cooperate. So I'll look, if someone's experiencing symptoms of an underactive thyroid, I will do blood tests. I'll look for iron deficiency. So when there's heat, yes, of course, we understand it can be related to changing sex hormones, but I'm going to think of the liver. So because traditional Chinese medicine is not my training, I've read a lot about it and I love it. I was saying to Nat earlier, one day I was just out for a walk and I just had this moment and I wrote a note in my phone. I think a lot of us going through perimenopause would feel so much better if we corrected iron deficiency, if it exists, if we got some acupuncture and stayed off our phones. I think that would help a lot. And that added, yes, we need to sleep properly too. But, so I do worry that some of the symptoms we currently attribute to perimenopause are potentially being caused by other things. And we want to find that out, because if we just focus on the hormones, we can miss iron deficiency and underperforming thyroid, or addressing some of the very basics. As humans, as a physical structure, we require all the nourishment from whole real foods. For me, there's no such thing as junk food. There's just junk and there's food. And as humans, we're supposed to eat food. And we've made food way too complicated, but we can keep it kind of that simple, unless we have a particular condition that needs very specific information. And we need movement and we need sunlight and we want to maintain our strength. And I know that might sound like a to-do list, but as we live our lives, if we just incorporate those things, all of that gives us a really solid base. So I see that our perimenopause overlays our existing health. And so I try to, I look at it that way.
I have a question, follow-up question, I should say. But also, I did some research the other day. I was just curious. I asked the internet, as you do, how active Australians were especially women, and 78% of Australians were classified as insufficiently physically active. I wish more women understood that the majority of us don't want to be at the gym. We don't want to be there. We don't want to be doing all these things. Like you said, there's a to-do list. But the benefits that come from doing it make it so important for us to commit to. But I was like so disappointed. I'm like, so you're telling me 22% of us are moving enough? That's not going to be helping anyone. Anyway, my question, however, that was just a side note. My question to you is, because you mentioned iron, and because you are so passionate about iron, how can iron in this phase of life be such an important thing to focus on? Why is that so important in terms of you shouting that from the rooftops?
You're very kind to ask me that. Thank you. It's like, I want to win over. Thank you, Nat. So essentially, when we hit puberty, it's a time obviously when our iron needs go higher than they ever have been before, because we're losing blood every month, and with that blood loss we lose iron. Sadly, right now, it's a time where I think a lot of teenagers begin to restrict what they're eating. So they either start skipping meals, they become purely plant-based. And yes, you can do that, but if you're not also educated in what all the nutrients you're going to miss out on when you go purely plant-based, you can become iron deficient incredibly quickly, because you now need 18 milligrams per day just to prevent deficiency. And so I think the way I see it is almost like this compounding effect. So we start off, we might be iron deficient when we're 14, and we may not find out that we are, or we might, but conventional iron supplements can be very constipating. There's a new generation of supplements that aren't, but that's a story for another day. But I think we can start off sort of iron deficient when we're 14, and then let's say by the time we're 18, the persistent production of stress hormones kicks in. So that persistent cortisol production or adrenaline production, we're talking about that off air, that's why I'm sort of gesturing this way. So then there's that, but we still haven't addressed the iron deficiency. So, and then on top of that, we can start to accumulate fat in the liver because we're drinking too much alcohol and living on too much processed food, and the periods then get heavier, so we're losing more iron each month. The thyroid literally requires iron to be able to make its hormones, so then the thyroid starts to underperform. You might have some insulin resistance creeping in by midlife, and then ovarian hormones start to change. And you've had this iron deficiency in the background the whole time. So I think a lot of women go into perimenopause either iron depleted, iron deficient, or with iron deficiency anemia. And iron for me it isn't just required for energy and brain function. And Lara shared with me this morning that a study actually came out showing that for women in perimenopause, iron deficiency was hugely related to brain fog, which is something that I very much agree with. And so maybe brain fog is not perimenopause, maybe it's way more likely to be iron deficiency. So if we're going into perimenopause and we don't have that physical energy, our thyroid's not getting the iron it needs to make hormones, because that's crucial for a robust metabolic rate, for temperature regulation, great brain function. Every cell in your body has a receptor for thyroid hormones and vitamin D. That says to me, no marketing is ever going to talk me out of how important vitamin D from sunshine is, because our bodies, if every cell in your body has a receptor for a thing, it means it wants it. So if we're going into perimenopause and we're already deficient in iron, you need iron to be able to make 2.5 million new red blood cells every second. So every second, 2.5 million more red blood cells. It's mind-boggling. It's breathtakingly magnificent. And part of what I try to do with my work is, I guess, get people a bit more in touch with how extraordinary the body is, because I think we look after what we care about. So whether that's the environment, our families, or our body. So rather than it being someone like us said, maybe don't do that. Maybe don't, whatever it is, like don't do that with your lifestyle. It comes from within. It's like, I'm not going to do that again this week. I already did it earlier, so I'm not going to do it again this week because I care so much about this and it blows my mind. So iron is needed for our physical energy, thyroid function. When we're deficient, we feel very anxious and our heart can race. It disrupts our sleep. Our thinking is not clear. But the biggest thing and I'll wrap up my answer to your question with this comment, the thing that makes me the saddest about women who live with persistent iron deficiency is their perceived lack of their own resilience. the word that excites me the most when someone has been iron deficient and it gets corrected and they say, it's like I have my resilience back. So all the challenges are still, that gives me goosebumps, all the challenges are still there. Things can still be genuinely difficult, genuinely painful, not how we want them to be, but we're okay in that. We can handle that. We still feel sad. We still feel we're grieving about that, whatever that is. It doesn't diminish that, but we're okay. There's a strength. And I love that and I want that for women.
The other thing too, Lara, you talked about estrogen being, or us being more estrogen dominant, just generally speaking, then puts us at being more iron deficient. And it's a perpetual cycle.
Yeah, well, it's actually interesting. Part of the wisdom of the body, actually, higher levels of estrogen does help to promote more iron absorption, because the body sort of knows that the high estrogen life phase during the reproductive years, especially during pregnancy, is a time when the body might need more iron. So, but the real connection with perimenopause is that the super heavy periods are quite a common symptom of perimenopause.
Right.
So that's when, as Dr. Libby said, like you maybe against a background of already being deficient, and then you start losing, and I'll just, for everyone, I mean, this will be an important takeaway if you don't know already, an acceptable amount of menstrual fluid to lose in one period over all the days of the period is about 80 milliliters. It's about 5 tablespoons, or the contents of about 1.5 eggs. And very often when I'm talking about this, I know there are people in the audience doing the maths and thinking, yeah, wait, I lose like,
I tend
400.
to say if you have to change a pad or a tampon more than every 4 hours, that's a heavy flow.
Exactly.
I put that on Instagram once and everyone was like, why has no one told me? Why has no one told me? Why has no one told me? Like, we don't talk about it.
Yeah.
We don't talk about our periods enough, period. We just don't. It's not something that we're discussing. I remember saying to a patient one day, do you have a burning sensation when you're menstruating, or is it more of a cramp? She said, it's burning, isn't everybody's?
Aww.
And I said, no. Actually, the nature of your pain indicates, and what's actually going on, and that's how we treat that is very different. But you're not sitting there with your girlfriends over a wine going, was yours burning? No, mine's cramping. What's yours doing? Like, it's just not what we do.
True.
We know this as practitioners, but people aren't talking about that. So I think the flow is a really important thing to talk about, because if you are changing a pad or tampon and that's just a guide, but roughly, then that's what we would consider heavier.
Yeah, and there's no way to keep up with your iron from food if you're bleeding that heavily.
So I mean, to the point, you need to fix, Libby's going to say fix iron first, but you need to figure out why you're iron deficient. So if you're heavy bleeding, you'd start there. And if you're not heavy bleeding, where do you start?
Or then we would look at what's happening with the gut. We'd look at what's happening with absorption. There are lots of factors in food that will block. I don't want to overtake this and make it about iron, but there are things in food that can actually bind to iron absorption, stop iron from being absorbed. So in our plant-based foods, yes, there's small amounts of iron, but there are also factors like phytates, oxalates, polyphenols, like tannins in things like tea and coffee that will bind to iron and stop it from being absorbed. So if you eat a very low animal food way, or you eat vegan or vegetarian, your iron requirements are actually higher, not just because all of your iron is in non-heme form, which is harder for the body to absorb, but also because of all of those factors that can bind iron up. So yeah, but addressing the gut and making sure, I actually think too, and Lara speaks about this so beautifully in her books, there are very few women who eat for satiety and robust health and energy. We all grew up with skinny, whereas now they're growing up with strong. And that's a power shift, growing up being told, let's foster our physical strength, because then we're, I think, much more likely to eat for robust health and energy rather than restriction. It's really hard to eat 18 milligrams of iron a day when you're a kind of meat and potatoes kind of eater. It's virtually impossible if you're skipping meals or having coffee for lunch or just grabbing a piece of banana bread on the run. You're not going to get your iron going in. So I think sometimes it's just a lack of intake.
You also talked about how the impact of low iron can make you feel so low, anxious, just depleted, brain fog, all of that. We don't associate that at all with iron.
No, a study came out in 2023 called the Psychiatric Manifestations of Iron Deficiency Anemia. And that's a thing I want to shout from the rooftop. So I feel that when we start to and I wish I knew you all those years ago, because who knows what was happening with your iron levels back then. Because when you think about a person at any age, a teenage girl, a woman going through perimenopause, when iron is low, we feel more anxious. So the study actually looked at people diagnosed with anxiety, depression, and a condition called ahedonia, which is the inability to experience pleasure. And they went in and looked at people diagnosed with that and what their iron parameters were like. And the majority were iron deficient in some form, depleted, but a lot had actual iron deficiency anemia, the most severe form. And when they corrected it, for some, their symptoms improved significantly, but for others, their symptoms resolved. Not everyone it resolved, but when you think, let's say what you're experiencing is an 8 out of 10 in intensity, whether it's anxiety, depression, whatever it is. Imagine if fixing, in this example, iron dropped it to 3 out of 10. That's a very different life. And then you can do other things to deal with the 3 out of 10 that's left over. So when there's mood symptoms, the first thing I think of is iron.
Ali, you also spoke about how during perimenopause, a lot of these feelings and what you're experiencing in terms of symptoms made it really difficult to navigate relationships. For the woman that's here today that really is feeling that, what advice would you have for them?
Well, now I know apparently I need a new husband because it gives me the oxytocin.
Well, maybe you don't need a new one. We just need I don't know what that is. We just need to find that again.
I think the thing that helped me was to just, the more information I got, the more I shared with my husband. And I was lucky to have a husband that wanted to know what was going on. He could see the changes happening in me. He was concerned. He wanted to fix it like a lot of men do. I didn't know how to fix anything, but the more I learnt, the more I understood, the more I could inform him. And I think, it just became something that we created a team together, looking at sort of, there was perimenopause here, and we were going to sort of see how we could fix me together in order to sort of feel back in balance again. And it was a roller coaster relationship wise. I mean, there were days where I was going to leave that man. I was plotting his demise, but I'm so glad that there was a sense of it in myself too, that I knew it wasn't me too. So I was able to go, no, this is just, there's something else happening here that has taken me completely out of balance with myself. So being able to stay in that relationship was really important. And I think the steps that I always think is take your partner to the naturopath with you, or the doctor with you, or the physio with you, and they can be informed by the professionals as well, so they can hear what's happening in your life. So, but talk to them about it. I think we're trained sometimes as women to, like you were saying, we're not talking about our periods, and for a long time we certainly weren't talking about menopause, and that it was kind of an embarrassing thing to mention. But I think men actually really want to know. They really want to know what's happening.
Well, I think they get worried, and like you said, men want to fix things.
Yeah.
And they want to help us. But it's interesting. I think the conversation, I've seen this when I wrote Beautiful You and started to speak to women about how to talk to their children about getting their period and where did I come from, and parents would say, well, when's the right time to do that? And I would say from the minute that they ask you, they're ready to learn. Having this conversation that evolves over many years means that at the time that a young girl starts to menstruate, it's not a big deal. It's just what happens next. Yeah. It'll be nice for when that's the case, when in the household, when it's a conversation that just keeps on rolling over many, many years, but also that hopefully what we learn here is that it doesn't necessarily need to be that way if we have the right information earlier.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
So beautifully said, Nat.
Yeah. I was going to say, there's nothing that makes me prouder is having my 19-year-old daughter at the table with her dad saying, oh my God, my period was so painful today. And he's like, yeah, well, what happened? Like, I don't know, it was this and that. And I mean, God, I never would have talked about that with my dad. But like, we're talking about that now. And I think exactly, we need to be talking like that at the table about menopause too, perimenopause.
I think it takes all the stigma away. It takes all the what ifs away, and it just becomes something we can be more curious about, but navigate together. As I'm sure many men feel like they're just left in the dark, and they go to work and they talk to their workmates and they're like, yep, well, she was like this, that and the other yesterday, wasn't she? Where we can hopefully start to diminish that and really have more open conversations. We are going to open up to questions in a minute, but before we do, Lara, let's circle back to that, as you mentioned very early on, what defines menopause?
Yeah, and also I just want to respond. Thanks for the great conversation, you guys. But one really important thing as part of heading into it, I'm just curious, Ali, if this would have helped you, two things, I guess, from what you said. That perimenopause is primarily, according to the scientists, a neurological transition state. So the neurological symptoms are the biggest one. It's interesting that those were surprising to you, and that does speak to how that sort of blindsided you. Yeah. But it's this recalibration of the nervous system that can definitely, in our modern world, and aggravated by things like iron deficiency and other problems, manifest as sleep disturbance primarily. The other part of the neurological transition state, I'll just give a mention, is migraine headaches. A recurrence of migraines is really classic part of perimenopause. So typically the trajectory will be had migraines when you were a teenager, when you first got first puberty, maybe if you ever tried to take the pill, then migraines maybe went quiet for a while, and then if they start coming back in your 40s, that's second puberty. That's a classic sign of perimenopause. So another message that can really help, and I'm sure you all in this room know this, but it's worth saying again, it's temporary. If you do experience symptoms as part of the transition, that's not how you're always going to be now. The research is really clear on that. Well, for one thing, there's ways to feel better, of course, which you've all got books about that, and there's many strategies, including hormone therapy, including nutritional, and you can mix them all together to feel better. So you shouldn't have to put up with symptoms. But also, even if you did nothing, the symptoms will eventually resolve. And that's pretty clear in the research. That's some beautiful Australian research where they surveyed women in their 50s, 60s, and 70s and beyond, 80s. And they pulled some great quotes from women saying during those decades, they report feeling, quote, pretty fantastic. Yeah. So, I hope there's some, like me, I'm 5 years past my final period. I think an important part of the perimenopause conversation, actually, yes, speaking with other women in perimenopause, but speaking with women in postmenopause to find out what's coming. Like my younger sister, who's 6 years younger to me, said, okay, you go first and tell me how it is on the other side of the mountain. And it's great. It actually is. There is something about the stability, like my professor colleague saying, being freed from the demands of reproductive hormones. As much as I loved ovulating, and I've always been my work was a big part about being a cheerleader for hormones, there is something nice about being in the kind of post-reproductive state. And the other thing I want to say before I get to the definitions, we all have so much to share. One thing, watching the whole discussion over the awareness of perimenopause come into the forefront, which is great. But a puzzling part of it, almost a jarring part of it for me, has been this, adulation, estradiol and progesterone, or estrogen and progesterone are amazing. They're important for bone health. They're important for brain and heart health. And yes, they are. But why only after the age 45? What about all the young women? So, what I find very jarring is, yes, this is awareness that those hormones are, maybe we should be supplementing, and maybe we should in some cases. But what about all the, this is a podcast for another day, but what about all the women in their teenage years and 20s and 30s who have had their hormones entirely switched off by hormonal birth control and sit like that for decades? And they're not, and you do a blood test for a woman on the pill, she has very menopausal levels of estradiol, and that's showing up as reduced peak bone density and various things. So that's obviously a topic for another day, but you see what I mean by jarring. It's like, why suddenly in your late 40s are hormones important when they never were before? So I'm actually circling back. I have a book on perimenopause, but I'm circling back to my roots now to targeting young women, and cycle while you can. Women make hormones by ovulating, so have natural cycles. Enjoy your hormones while you've got them. They're amazing, and not just for making babies. Right. But in terms of the definition, and we do have to include this in the podcast because it's creating a lot of confusion, is the conflation between the terms perimenopause and menopause. And it's happened for very logical reasons. It's that, I mean, as Dr. Libby said, perimenopause used to just be something that really doctors would talk about, but now it's out there. Perimenopause is anywhere between sort of 4 to 10 years leading up to that 1 year after your final period. And then menopause is either just the one day, depending on who you ask, or it's the entire life phase, the hopefully 40-year life phase after your final period. That's how epidemiologists use the term. So if you hear a stat like, 1 billion women are in menopause, you'll hear, that means in those post-menopausal years. That's synonymous with postmenopause in that sense. But then we've got, and mainly coming out of the UK, but this also the phrase, the menopause transition, which gets shortened to the menopause, which is exactly synonymous to perimenopause. So then you get women talking about going through menopause, by which they mean going through perimenopause. And the reason it's so important is they are such different life phases, especially in the early years of perimenopause. Estrogen is higher than normal. Periods are heavier than normal. I mean, how different could that be compared to postmenopause when estrogen is obviously low, not zero. It's about 10% of what it was. No periods, less of a problem with iron deficiency, for example. I mean, you see what I mean? They are very different from each other, and yet the same word is used for both. And so next time you hear someone talking about, what is beneficial for menopause, just stop and think, do they mean perimenopause or postmenopause? Because you can't conflate them. I hope that helps.
It does help a lot.
Yeah. Dr. Libby has something to add. Yes.
No, to say something.
Yeah.
This extraordinary human is full of knowledge, and she's so incredibly generous, and she asks us to share stories and our knowledge. But as someone, so when I talk about TCM and when I talk about acupuncture and the immense benefits of that at any life stage, but particularly in perimenopause, can you share, when you have a woman who is really experiencing a really tough time through perimenopause with your TCM hat on, what would you do for her? How would you support her?
Thank you for asking that question. I think TCM has historically supported women forever when it comes to the transitions, and it's very individualized. So it's not an easy question to answer because it comes down to how you're presenting. Are you, some women are having hot flushes, others aren't. Do you treat them the same? Absolutely not. So it's very much profiling symptoms, asking a lot of questions, and then being able to tailor a treatment specific to that. I spend far more time managing cortisol and helping women regulate their nervous system than I do anything else, because your hormones that we're talking about, your ovarian hormones, your sex hormones, they don't lead, they follow. So in being able to manage cortisol and helping women to recognize how much of an issue that is, and that's what acupuncture does. Acupuncture is just a massive reset for the nervous system. I don't even have to really do much. I just reset the nervous system and I'm like, you're good now. And so that's really what I do. But the other thing that I think is really missing, and Libby, you can absolutely speak to this, is that we are in this phase are so overstretched. We are doing way too much, or maybe we're not. We just think we are because we are watching other people be so busy that we have really adopted this idea that stress is the success piece, and it's just not. And so the other thing, I was on a podcast, I was interviewing someone else on a podcast, and I was telling a story, and I've told this lots, but I'll tell it again. My trainer says to me every week, you need to rate your stress from 1 to 5. And I every week would be somewhere between 3 and 5, 5 being the highest. And I said to her this one day, really not in a nice tone, who the hell puts 1 there? Like, who's a 1 out of 5? Who are they? Who are those women? And I said it really sarcastically. And then I caught myself, and I was so upset at the words that had come out of my mouth, because this is the everything that I talk about, yet that I was still falling prey to that. I decided in that moment, it was such a light bulb moment, I decided that in any moment I didn't want to be more than a 2. I want to be a 1 or a 2 out of 5 at all times. What do I need to do to be a 1 or a 2? And what's very interesting in asking myself that question, I didn't delegate anything. I didn't change anything. I just decided. And from that moment on, every time I feel myself spilling into anything more, I'm like, we decided we weren't doing this. And so it's just a decision. Isn't that, like, for me, it was just a decision anyway. And I know everyone's circumstances are different, but I think when we have this awareness about how much stress really does kind of come in like a bull in a china shop and just control everything, then we can actually start to make better decisions around how we live our lives, and then all of a sudden things actually feel a little bit better. I do want to open to Q&A, but I have one more question, Ali, for you. You have created a platform which is very much helping women to navigate perimenopause, menopause with all sorts of things, but I want to ask the tech question to you. And how is it that you see that this is going to really help women in the future, the tech that we currently have now, and what you also see, because you have probably privy to what a lot of us aren't seeing in terms of what things are being developed and platforms. How do you think that's going to help women moving forward?
Oh gosh, I think it's mostly just getting the correct diagnosis. And I mean, obviously, you know, with Lara and Libby, there are so many symptoms that are attributed to perimenopause. But what, as you were saying, Libby, you know, what is perimenopause? What is thyroid? What is this? What is that? So I think our plan is to have that tech piece that can really get you a faster diagnosis to what's happening in your body. And to be able to just, I mean, as you know, like when you travel outside the cities, there's so many women wanting assistance. There's so many women in the rural areas that are looking for support somehow or another. So that was really a huge piece for us to be able to see at scale how we could support women, whether it's even just through knowledge, a library of information, great telehealth services with allied services as well. Like that's something that we really want to, we are creating in order to help as many women as we could, because it's, you know, you hear there is a lot of women out there suffering, and knowing what's going on, I think, and getting to women, as you were saying earlier as well, I think is incredibly important, because I think you can shift things so much better once you've shifted your nutrition and your whatever you need to shift, your mindset, get yourself to a 1 and a 2 in stress, you know, we're going to be able to navigate those years a lot easier. So we really want to work on those younger women years Amazing. Too and help.
Awesome. All right. So questions. We've got a little, oh my goodness. Okay. I'll let you deal with that. Hands up. If you've loved this conversation, you are going to really love what came next. After we wrapped up the podcast episode, we opened the floor for the live audience questions. And honestly, the Q&A was where the magic happened. We dug into the questions every woman wants to ask, but rarely gets to get a straight answer to. Things like, am I going to hurt myself if I don't take hormones? How do I regulate my nervous system? Because I know that's at the root of so many of my symptoms, but I just don't know how. Questions also like, how do I fix my iron? How do I even know if that's part of the problem? And so much more. That Q&A is exclusive to members inside the membership, and this is where we go beyond the conversations that actually help you understand and balance your hormones, your mood, and your energy from the inside out. You can join us right now at natkringudis.com. Just look for the membership and you'll get instant access to the full Q&A, plus of course over 45 masterclasses, live calls with me, and all the tools you need to truly feel like yourself again. So if this episode has sparked something in you, come and join us inside the membership. It's where the real transformations happen. Thanks for listening to this episode. I absolutely loved creating this special live event, and until next time, bye.